The moment my ex-husband looked down at the baby in my arms, all the color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no words came out at first. Then he whispered barely loud enough for anyone else to hear. "Is he mine?" Even now, almost 2 years later, I can still see that look. Not anger, not confusion. Regret, the kind that arrives too late to change anything. But to explain how we got there, I need to take you back to Lexington, Kentucky 7 months before that day. Back when I still believed my marriage could survive anything. My name is Karen Mitchell. I'm 38 years old and I've been a police officer with the Lexington Police Department for over 12 years. When people hear female cop, they usually picture someone tough, someone who doesn't cry. What they don't picture is a woman sitting alone in a Walmart parking lot at 10 o'clock at night eating cold chicken tenders and trying not to fall apart. But that's exactly who I was. My husband Ethan was a doctor, an OB-GYN of all things. We'd been married 8 years. Most of them were good. Not perfect, but good. We bought a small brick house on the south side of Lexington. We hosted Thanksgiving dinners. We spent Saturdays wandering through Lowe's pretending we knew how to do home improvement projects. Normal life. The kind of life most people want. The problem started with children, or more specifically, our inability to have one. For years we tried. Doctor appointments, tests, specialists, more tests. Every month seemed to end the same way. A little disappointment followed by another attempt to stay hopeful. At first, Ethan and I faced it together. Then slowly something changed. Not between us. Between Ethan and his father, Richard Mitchell. My father-in-law, a retired insurance executive who believed he knew everything about everyone, especially women. I tolerated him because I loved Ethan. Looking back, that may have been my biggest mistake. The night everything began falling apart was a Sunday family dinner in March. I remember because Kentucky had gotten one of those early spring rainstorms. The kind that makes everything gray. Richard sat at the head of the table as usual. His wife Linda passed around mashed potatoes while everyone pretended Richard wasn't about to say something offensive. Again. Halfway through dinner, he set down his fork and looked directly at Ethan. "You know what the problem is, don't you?" The room went quiet. Ethan sighed. "Dad." "No, I'm serious." Richard pointed toward me. "Karen spends all day chasing criminals and carrying a gun." I felt my stomach tighten. "Here we go." Richard leaned back in his chair. "She's a cop. Women like her don't have babies." The silence that followed felt endless. Linda stared at her plate. Ethan rubbed his forehead. I waited. I honestly thought my husband would tell him to stop. Instead, Ethan said nothing. Not one word. That hurt more than Richard's comment. I stood up. "I think we're leaving." Richard shrugged. Sometimes the truth hurts. The drive home was miserable. Rain hit the windshield while neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "You just sat there." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "He's old Karen." "No, he's rude. He doesn't mean—" "Don't." My voice cracked. "Don't make excuses for him." For the first time in years, I slept in the guest room. Things never really recovered after that. Not completely. Over the next few months, Ethan became distant. Longer hours at the hospital, less conversation, more tension. Every disagreement somehow circled back to the same subject. Children. One evening I found him sitting alone in our backyard. The sun was setting. The neighbor's dog was barking. Everything looked so ordinary. That's probably why his words hit so hard. "I don't think this is working anymore." I remember staring at him, certain I'd heard him wrong. "What isn't working?" "Our marriage." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain couldn't process what he had just said. "Ethan, we've had a rough year. It's more than that." "Then talk to me." He looked away. "I don't see a future anymore." I felt something inside me break, not dramatically, quietly, like a branch snapping under snow. Weeks later, he filed for divorce. Just like that. 8 years reduced to paperwork. Friends were shocked. My coworkers were furious. One of the older officers offered to slash Ethan's tires. I appreciated the sentiment. I declined. Most days I functioned on autopilot. Work, sleep, repeat. The divorce became final in late June. I signed the papers in a downtown office building on Main Street. Afterward, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, just staring through the windshield. I wasn't angry yet. Mostly I was heartbroken. The anger would come later. 3 weeks after the divorce became official, I woke up feeling sick. At first I blamed stress. Then the nausea continued, day after day. I stopped at a pharmacy after work and bought a pregnancy test. Actually 3 tests. I didn't trust the first one. I took them in my apartment bathroom around midnight. The air conditioner rattled in the background. The bathroom light flickered. I remember every detail. Because my entire life changed in less than 5 minutes. Positive. 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 I sat on the edge of the bathtub staring at those little lines, laughing and crying at the same time. After years of trying, after all the arguments, after the divorce, I was pregnant. The timing felt almost cruel. For several days I carried the secret alone. I thought about calling Ethan. Then I imagined his father's voice. Women like her don't have babies. I imagined the divorce papers, the silence, the abandonment, and something inside me hardened, not with hatred, with clarity. The child growing inside me deserved people who wanted him, not people who doubted his existence before he was even conceived. So I made a decision. I would raise this baby myself, at least for now. What I didn't know was that the hardest part wasn't behind me. It was just beginning. Finding out I was pregnant should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, I spent the first few weeks terrified, not of becoming a mother, of becoming one alone. The morning after those 3 positive tests, my alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment for several minutes before getting up. Nothing around me looked different. The coffee maker still needed cleaning. The sink still held 2 dishes from the night before. The Lexington weather forecast still promised another humid Kentucky summer day. Yet everything had changed. I was going to have a baby, at 38, without a husband, without a plan, and somehow I still had to show up for work. I pulled on my uniform and headed to the police station. My partner, Officer Mike Reynolds, was already there drinking coffee when I walked into briefing. Mike was 61 years old and had spent more years in law enforcement than I had been alive. He immediately narrowed his eyes. "You look awful." "Good morning to you too. You sick?" "Just tired." That wasn't exactly a lie. The morning sickness had started with a vengeance. Unfortunately, nobody had informed my stomach that police officers don't get to stop working because they're nauseous. 2 hours later, I was standing beside a busy intersection directing traffic around a minor accident while trying not to throw up. By lunchtime, I was sitting in my patrol car eating saltine crackers. That became my routine. Crackers, ginger ale, deep breathing. Repeat. Every day brought new challenges. One afternoon I got sick during a shoplifting report at a Walgreens. Another time I had to excuse myself from a neighborhood dispute because the smell of someone's barbecue made me dizzy. My pregnancy wasn't exactly a secret for long. The first person I told was my older sister, Melissa. She lived outside Nashville and had 3 grown kids of her own. When she answered the phone, I barely got through the first sentence before I started crying. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." "Is the baby okay?" The word baby sounded strange. Real. My baby. According to my doctor, everything looked good. But emotionally, that was another story. Melissa listened while I unloaded months of hurt. The divorce. The loneliness. The fear. Finally, she interrupted. "Karen." "What?" "You're stronger than you think." I laughed bitterly. I don't feel strong. Nobody ever does while they're carrying the whole world on their shoulders. That conversation got me through several difficult weeks. Still, practical reality didn't care about inspirational phone calls. Rent had to be paid. Bills kept arriving. Life kept moving. I moved from our old house into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment near Richmond Road. Nothing fancy. Just clean and affordable. The 2nd bedroom sat empty. At first. Every time I walked past it, I imagined a crib. Tiny clothes. A rocking chair. Future memories. Then I worried about whether I could afford any of those things. Pregnancy has a way of making you emotional at unexpected moments. One afternoon I stood inside Walmart staring at baby strollers. There were dozens of them. Different sizes. Different prices. Different features. I suddenly felt overwhelmed. A young employee walked over. "Can I help you find something?" I nearly burst into tears. Over strollers. The poor kid looked horrified. I quickly apologized and escaped to the grocery section. Pregnancy hormones are no joke. As summer turned into fall, another complication appeared. During a routine appointment, my doctor frowned while reviewing some test results. "Karen, I'd like to monitor you more closely." The words immediately raised my blood pressure. "Why?" "Your pregnancy is considered high risk." I sat there gripping the edge of the examination table. High risk. Nobody wants to hear that. The doctor explained everything carefully. My age increased certain risks. Nothing was wrong at the moment. But they wanted additional appointments and extra monitoring. When I got back to my car afterward, I just sat there, watching people come and go from the medical office, families, couples, expectant parents holding hands. I couldn't stop wondering what my life would have looked like if Ethan had stayed. Then I got angry at myself, because the truth was simple. He hadn't stayed. He had left. And no amount of wishing could change that. A few weeks later, one of our mutual friends called me. Her name was Rebecca. She worked at another medical office in town. After a few minutes of small talk, she hesitated. I saw Ethan recently. My stomach tightened. Oh, he seems... She searched for the right word. Fine. Fine. That one word bothered me more than it should have. I wasn't hoping he was miserable. At least that's what I told myself. But hearing that he seemed perfectly happy while I struggled through pregnancy alone felt unfair. For days afterward, I kept picking up my phone, starting text messages, deleting them, again and again. I wanted to tell him. Didn't he deserve to know? Wasn't he the father? Then I'd remember the divorce papers, the silence during family dinners, the way he chose his father's opinions over his wife's reality, and I'd put the phone away. The internal battle exhausted me. Every choice felt wrong. Tell him. Don't tell him. Protect yourself. Protect the baby. Forgive him. Forget him. Round and round my thoughts went. Meanwhile, my coworkers transformed into a comedy act. The moment they learned about my pregnancy, they became ridiculously protective. One officer refused to let me carry anything heavier than a clipboard. Another moved a chair across the room before I even asked. Mike became the worst offender. Every morning he appeared holding coffee. Got your decaf. I'm capable of carrying coffee. I know. Then why are you carrying it? Because if anything happens to that baby, your sister might drive up here and kill me. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled the coffee. Those moments mattered. More than people realize. Because loneliness doesn't disappear all at once. It fades through small acts of kindness. A phone call. A joke. Someone remembering your favorite snack. Someone asking how you're doing and actually waiting for the answer. By November, I could feel the baby kicking regularly. The first time it happened during a patrol shift, I nearly pulled the cruiser over. I sat there with one hand on my stomach, laughing, crying, doing both at once. That night, I made another decision. A final one. I wasn't going to contact Ethan. Not then. Not yet. My son deserved peace. And I wasn't willing to invite chaos back into our lives simply because biology said I should. I thought that choice settled everything. I thought I still had months before the past could catch up to me. I was wrong. Because someone from Ethan's world was about to tell me a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. By early December, I was 7 months pregnant. The baby had developed a habit of kicking me every evening around 8 o'clock, usually when I was trying to relax. I like to imagine he was already stubborn. Maybe he got that from me, or maybe from his father. I tried not to think about Ethan too much anymore. Life had settled into a routine. Work. Doctor appointments. Calls with Melissa. Occasional naps whenever the baby and my schedule allowed them. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life, and I was slowly learning how to live it. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I had just finished a shift and was sitting in my cruiser outside a gas station when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Normally, I wouldn't answer. For some reason, I did. Hello? There was a brief pause. Karen? Yes. My name is Jennifer. Another pause. I used to work with Ethan. My stomach tightened instantly. Jennifer. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. She had been a nurse at St. Joseph Hospital. I'd met her several times during hospital events and holiday parties. What can I do for you? I asked carefully. She sounded nervous. Can we talk somewhere private? That wasn't the sort of sentence people casually dropped into conversations. An hour later, we met at a small coffee shop near downtown Lexington. The place smelled like fresh coffee beans and cinnamon rolls. Christmas decorations hung in the windows. Outside, people hurried through the cold. Inside, Jennifer looked like someone carrying a secret she wasn't sure how to share. After several uncomfortable moments, she finally spoke. I almost didn't call. Then why did you... She looked down at her coffee. Because what happened to you wasn't right. My pulse started racing. What are you talking about? Jennifer took a deep breath. After the divorce, people talked. I laughed softly. People always talk. No, I mean your father-in-law. That got my attention. He was telling everyone you couldn't have children. I stared at her. What? He told hospital staff, friends, anybody who would listen. I felt my face grow warm. That's ridiculous. I know. Jennifer nodded. He made it sound like doctors had confirmed it. I sat back in my chair. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything, but another part remembered all those dinners. All those comments, all those years. Suddenly, it didn't seem impossible at all. Jennifer continued. Karen, there was something else. I didn't like the sound of that. What? She hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. I overheard a conversation several months before your divorce. My stomach twisted. Between who? Ethan and his father. I waited. Jennifer looked genuinely uncomfortable. Richard was telling Ethan that your job was the reason you couldn't get pregnant. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. He actually believed that— I don't know what he believed. She sighed. But your father-in-law was very convincing. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I thought about all those years. All the appointments. All the uncertainty. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Richard had apparently decided the problem was me. Not medical facts. Not science. Not reality. Just me. The police officer. The woman who worked nights. The woman he never fully respected. Jennifer reached into her purse. There's one more reason I called. Now my heart was pounding. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I shouldn't technically have this. I unfolded it. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Medical terminology. Lab results. Dates. Then one line caught my eye. I looked up. What is this? Jennifer swallowed. It's from years ago. I stared at her. Ethan's records, she nodded slowly. My chest tightened. The document wasn't a diagnosis. It wasn't proof of anything definitive. But it did show something very important. Years earlier, Ethan had undergone fertility testing, and the results suggested there might have been concerns on his side. Not mine. His. I sat frozen. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered, He never told me. Jennifer shook her head. I don't think many people knew. The room suddenly felt too small. I remembered every appointment we'd attended together. Every awkward conversation. Every time Ethan had looked discouraged. Every moment I blamed myself. And now I was staring at evidence that maybe, just maybe, the entire story had never been what I thought. The drive home that night was a blur. Christmas lights flashed across neighborhoods. Holiday music played on the radio. I barely heard any of it. My mind kept replaying everything. Richard's comments. Ethan's silence. The divorce. The accusations. The assumptions. For the first time, anger began replacing sadness. Not explosive anger. Something colder. Something sharper. Because if Ethan had known there were questions about his own fertility, why had he allowed his father to blame me? Why hadn't he defended me? Why hadn't he told the truth? That night I barely slept. The baby kicked repeatedly as if he sensed my stress. Around 3 a.m, I sat on the couch with one hand on my stomach. What do? I whispered. The baby didn't answer. He just kicked again. Over the next several days I considered my options. Part of me wanted revenge. Real revenge. I imagined showing up at Richard's house with medical records. I imagined confronting Ethan. I imagined exposing every lie. But another part of me hesitated. Because anger has consequences, especially when you're about to become a mother. I wasn't just responsible for myself anymore. I had someone else to think about. So I waited. I focused on work, on doctor visits, on preparing for my son's arrival. Christmas came and went. Then New Year's. January arrived. My due date was getting closer. According to my doctor, everything looked stable. The high-risk concerns remained manageable. I started maternity leave paperwork, bought a crib, installed a car seat after watching 3 different YouTube tutorials and still feeling confused. Life moved forward. Then came the night everything exploded. January 18th, a Thursday. Cold enough to freeze puddles. I was finishing paperwork near the end of my shift when a sharp pain hit my lower abdomen. I froze. Waited. Another pain followed. Stronger this time. Okay, I muttered. That's new. At first I told myself it was nothing. Then my water broke. Right there. Inside my patrol vehicle. For one stunned second I simply stared. Then I grabbed my radio. Dispatch! The dispatcher immediately heard something in my voice. You okay, Karen? I laughed nervously. No. Another contraction hit. Hard. I think my son has decided today's the day. Within minutes everything became chaos. Ambulance. Sirens. Phone calls. Questions. The nearest and most appropriate hospital was obvious. St. Joseph. The same hospital where Ethan worked. The same hospital I had spent months avoiding. As the ambulance raced through Lexington's dark streets, I stared at the ceiling. A strange feeling settled over me. Not fear. Not excitement. Something else. Because for reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly felt certain. The past was about to catch up with all of us. And none of our lives would look the same by morning. The ambulance reached St. Joseph Hospital in less than 10 minutes. It felt like 10 seconds. And 10 hours. The contractions were coming hard and fast now. Every few minutes another wave rolled through my body, forcing me to grip the rails of the stretcher and breathe through it. The emergency entrance doors burst open. Bright lights. Voices. Footsteps. Medical staff moving with practiced speed. I recognized some of them immediately. I closed my eyes. Please don't let him be here. A few moments later I heard footsteps outside my room. Then a familiar voice. A voice I hadn't heard in over 7 months. What's the status? My stomach dropped. Ethan, of course. Because life apparently enjoyed cruel jokes. Denise glanced toward me. Karen, I need to tell you something. I already know. The poor woman looked relieved. Another contraction hit before she could respond. I squeezed her hand hard enough to make her wince. Sorry. It's okay. No, seriously? She laughed. Then the door opened, and Ethan walked in. For a moment neither of us spoke. The last time we'd seen each other had been in a lawyer's office. Now I was lying in a hospital bed carrying a baby that was about to enter the world. His eyes moved to my stomach, then back to my face, then down again. I watched him silently calculating dates. His expression shifted. Confusion. Concern. Something else. But before either of us could speak, another contraction interrupted everything. The next several hours became a blur. Pain. Breathing. Nurses. Monitors. Instructions. Time lost all meaning. To his credit, Ethan remained professional. Completely professional. Not once did he bring up our past. Not once did he ask questions. He did his job, and I focused on surviving labor. Shortly after 3 a.m, things became serious. The baby's heart rate fluctuated. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to concern the medical team. The room suddenly filled with more people. Equipment. Urgent voices. The kind of controlled chaos hospitals are built for. Fear finally found me. Not fear about Ethan. Not fear about the divorce. Fear for my son. For the first time that night, I started crying. Ethan noticed immediately. Karen. His voice softened. Look at me. I did. He's going to be okay. I wanted to believe him. For several terrifying minutes, nobody seemed entirely sure. Then things stabilized. Slowly. Gradually. The tension eased, and several hours later, just after sunrise, my son arrived. The first cry hit me harder than anything else that night. I cried instantly. Not graceful tears, ugly crying. Exhausted crying. Relieved crying. The kind you can't stop. The nurse carefully wrapped him in a blanket. He's beautiful. She wasn't wrong. He had a full head of dark hair, tiny fingers, tiny nose, and lungs powerful enough to wake half of Kentucky. The room laughed. I laughed too. Then the nurse placed him in my arms. Everything else disappeared. The hospital, the divorce, the pain, the anger, all of it. For a few precious moments there was only me and my son. Then Ethan stepped closer, and everything changed. I watched his face as he looked down. At first there was simple curiosity, then recognition, then shock. Pure shock. His eyes locked onto the baby. His jaw tightened. Every bit of color drained from his face. For several seconds nobody spoke. Finally he whispered, "Is he mine?" The room went silent. A couple nurses exchanged awkward glances. Denise suddenly became fascinated by a clipboard. I looked directly at Ethan. After everything that had happened, I expected anger. Maybe satisfaction. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Yes, his breathing changed. I could actually see it. He looked at the baby again, then back at me. The dates? Work. The realization hit him fully. I watched it happen. 7 months. The divorce. The pregnancy. The timeline. All of it. He sat down heavily in a nearby chair, as if his legs had stopped working. One nurse quietly left the room. Another followed. Word travels fast in hospitals, especially when doctors become the center of the story. A few minutes later, Ethan spoke again. "Why didn't you tell me?" That question had lived in my head for months. Now that it was finally spoken aloud, the answer felt surprisingly simple. I adjusted the blanket around my son. "Would you have believed me?" Ethan didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The silence answered for him. I continued. "You believed your father." Still silence. "You watched him insult me for years." His eyes dropped toward the floor. "You let him convince you I was the problem." For the first time since entering the room, Ethan looked genuinely ashamed. Then another voice spoke from the doorway. "I knew it." Jennifer. The nurse who had contacted me. Apparently she was working that morning. Behind her stood two other staff members, people who knew pieces of the story, not gossip, facts. One of them quietly said, "Karen was never the problem." Nobody disagreed. Nobody could. Because over the years, many staff members had heard Richard's comments. Many had heard his assumptions. And now there was a living, breathing baby in my arms, destroying every one of them. Ethan looked like a man watching his entire reality collapse. Then came the final blow. Jennifer stepped forward. "Ethan, you remember those fertility consultations?" His eyes immediately widened. The room became very still. She wasn't exposing confidential information. She was reminding him of something he already knew, something he had chosen to ignore. His shoulders slumped. That was the moment I understood. Deep down he had known. Maybe not everything, maybe not for certain, but enough. Enough to ask questions, enough to defend me, enough not to destroy a marriage. Instead he chose the easier path, believing his father. The truth wasn't humiliating because people learned it. The truth was humiliating because he already knew it. And now everyone could see that. No shouting followed. No dramatic speech. No revenge plan. Just silence. The most painful kind. Because sometimes exposure happens naturally. All you have to do is let the truth stand in the room. And that's exactly what happened. As Ethan stared at the son he had walked away from before ever knowing existed, I realized something unexpected. I didn't need revenge anymore. The consequences had arrived all by themselves. The hospital room felt strangely peaceful after that. My son slept quietly in the bassinet beside my bed. The morning sun filtered through the window. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped softly, and Ethan sat in a chair near the wall looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. Even though it had only been a few hours, I focused on my son. Every few minutes I found myself checking to make sure he was breathing. New mothers will understand that. You spend months waiting to meet them. Then suddenly they're here and you can't stop looking at them. Ethan eventually stood. "I should go." I nodded. Neither of us knew what else to say. He paused at the door. "Karen." I looked up. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. Part of me had imagined hearing them for months. Now that they had finally arrived, they didn't change much. I believed he meant them. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that apologies don't reverse choices. They don't erase years. They don't rebuild trust. Still, I appreciated that he said them. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." He nodded once and walked out. The door closed behind him. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt completely free. Not victorious. Free. There is a difference. The next few weeks passed in a blur of diapers, bottles, and exhaustion. I named my son Jacob. Melissa drove up from Tennessee and practically took over my apartment. She cooked, cleaned, organized things that didn't need organizing. At one point she labeled shelves. I still don't know why. Apparently becoming an aunt again unlocked a new level of energy. One afternoon she caught me staring at Jacob while he slept. "What?" I asked. She smiled. "You look happy." The word surprised me. Happy. Not relieved. Not surviving. Happy. And she was right. For the first time in a very long time life wasn't easy. Far from it. I was a single mother. I hadn't slept more than 4 consecutive hours in weeks. My apartment constantly looked like a tiny tornado had passed through. But somehow things felt lighter. Because every decision I made now moved toward something instead of away from something. About a month later, Ethan called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Hello." His voice sounded nervous, which was unusual. "Hi." A brief silence followed. Then he asked if we could meet. Not as husband and wife. Not even as former spouses. As parents, that part mattered. So I agreed. We met at a small diner near Hamburg Pavilion. Neutral territory. Public. Safe. Ethan arrived early. When I walked in carrying Jacob's car seat, he immediately stood. The look on his face when he saw his son was impossible to miss. Pure heartbreak, mixed with wonder. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. We spent 2 hours talking. Really talking. For the first time in years. Eventually, the conversation turned toward Richard. Ethan rubbed his forehead. I confronted him. That got my attention. And he denied everything. I wasn't surprised. Richard didn't strike me as someone who accepted responsibility. "What happened?" Ethan gave a humorless laugh. I showed him evidence. That surprised me. Apparently, Ethan had spent weeks digging through old records and conversations. The deeper he looked, the worse things became. Family members, friends, hospital staff. The pattern was undeniable. Richard had spent years pushing his own opinions as facts. The confrontation hadn't gone well. According to Ethan, it ended with shouting. For once, Richard wasn't the loudest person in the room. The fallout spread through the family quickly. Some relatives stopped speaking to him. Others distanced themselves. Linda, his wife, apparently moved into their guest room for a while. The consequences weren't dramatic, just painful. The kind that linger. Months later, Ethan told me something else. Richard had started attending counseling. I nearly laughed when I first heard that. Not because counseling is funny. Because convincing Richard Mitchell to admit he needed help felt harder than solving world peace. Yet there he was, actually trying. Life is strange sometimes. As spring arrived, another unexpected thing happened. Ethan changed. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But genuinely. He began showing up consistently for Jacob. Doctor appointments. Visits. Phone calls. The boring responsibilities that real parenting requires. The version of Ethan I saw wasn't the man who had signed divorce papers. He was a man learning to live with regret. And trying to become someone better. That didn't mean I wanted him back. Far from it. One evening, about 6 months after Jacob was born, Ethan finally asked, not directly, but close enough, "Do you think there will ever be another chance for us?" I looked down at my son playing with toy blocks on my living room floor, then back at Ethan. The answer hurt, because part of me would always remember the man I married. But memories aren't marriages, and hope isn't trust. No. He nodded slowly. I think he already knew. I understand. And surprisingly, he did. There was no argument, no pleading, no anger, just acceptance. That conversation marked the end of something. Not our marriage. That had ended long before. It marked the end of unfinished business, the end of resentment, the end of waiting for accountability. Months later, I found myself driving through Lexington on a warm summer evening. Jacob was asleep in his car seat. The radio played softly. Traffic moved slowly. Nothing extraordinary happened. No dramatic victory. No grand celebration. Yet I felt more successful than I ever had. Because I finally understood something. The best revenge wasn't humiliating Ethan. It wasn't exposing Richard. It wasn't making anyone suffer. The best revenge was building a life that no longer depended on their approval. A life filled with peace, purpose, and a little boy who laughed every time I made ridiculous animal noises. If someone had told me years earlier that I'd end up here, I wouldn't have believed them. But life has a funny way of taking us where we need to go instead of where we planned. And sometimes the people who walk away from you aren't revealing your value. They're revealing their own limitations. If you've ever been underestimated, judged unfairly, or forced to rebuild after heartbreak, I hope this story reminds you that healing is possible. And if this journey meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope you'll join me again for another story.